Hello, everyone. I am Gregory T. Jenkins, founder and CEO of Quintasia Studios. This is the Quintasia Podcast. Thank you for joining us today. For those who have been with us before, we have our first returning guest today. We had a blast the last time that she was with us, and she has now graciously agreed to join us. Please welcome back to the podcast, Jeanette Lenoir. Jeanette, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with you, Greg, and the rest of your team. It is a pleasure, and thank you for having me back. How exciting! I'm your first returning guest. I love it. Thank you so much. What an honor.
So, ladies and gentlemen, now today, and that is the beauty of when you have your own podcast, you can kind of do what you want, structure things. We're going to do things a little bit differently than what you've seen us do today. Today, basically, we're going to be talking about one specific topic, but it's going to be, rather than the management team asking questions of our guests, this is meant to be a discussion. And what we want to do, well, first, I'll preface the discussion by saying, yes, we are an entertainment company, and yes, we make film and television. Wonderful. But we are a company that we believe that we have a purpose, and we believe in being good corporate citizens. And as part of that, that translates into we care about social justice. Now, I told you that we were, part of this podcast is we were going to be talking to people, who are in the struggle for social justice. But the media has a big role, we believe, to play, whether they want to or not, in this space. And the topics that we're going to be talking about today relate to what the role that the media plays in how things are perceived. So we're talking about issues of restorative justice. And what I mean by that is, if there were certain built-in advantages, and I'm not going to pose that as if, because it's not theoretical. There are certain advantages that were built into our system, which leads to inequality today. How do we correct those built-in advantages, if you will, and in such a way that we make our society better? That's our goal. Is how to I mean, we see what's happening out there. We see the constant situation of, people of color being attacked, being killed, and this is nothing new. This has been happening for decades, for centuries. I think maybe we've reached a space where we're seriously saying to ourselves as a nation, how do we stop this? How do we get out of this cycle? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But we're going to do it in a way, hopefully, that you will find that maybe we'll bring a perspective to it that you hadn't thought about it today. So I hope that you'll stick around, and I hope that you'll listen to this discussion. So let me start out by asking this question. I always have to start with our education system. And the reason why I start there is they've done studies, and I think everybody, I won't say everybody, but I'm sure a lot of people have heard, you can predict what your crime rate is going to be by your fourth grade graduation percentage. If you have a lot of people who are not successfully completing fourth grade, you are going to have a high crime rate. There's a direct relationship between those two. So, and that's just one example of inequity in this system. How do we go about repairing this and giving an opportunity for everyone in the country to, live out their best lives. I'll throw that out there.
All right. I will assume that question is directed at me as your guest. So that's a very big question. You asked a very loaded question. All right. It is not easy to answer. I can answer it with my emotions. I can tell you how I feel being a Black woman in this country. I can point to different examples across the country. I can even point to history and have you take a look back, right? But I think the best way to really reach people is to widen the aperture of our lives and of our view. How are we really looking at the world? So that's where statistics and data comes in. So when we look at the data is very clear. The data tells us, when we look at the power structure of this country, the power structure of this country, I mean, the richest Americans, the top 10 richest Americans, all 100% white. 90% of Congress is white and mostly male. Most of our US governors, 90%, 96% of them are white and mostly male. Our top military advisors, 100% white, male, until Biden administration just recently appointed General Lloyd Austin as the first African American to lead the Department of Defense. All right. How old is America? So that's over 400 years, right? So when you look at that history, when you look at the examples on the ground, when you look at the data, when you look at the statistics, one would be willfully ignorant, and deliberately evil to not recognize that we have a problem, and then to not deliberately work to fix that problem, especially when as a nation we position ourselves as the most powerful nation in the world, the parental figure in the universe, the one to say we are the beacon of hope and everything that is good in humanity. You want democracy? We got it. Come get it. Well, that's a disingenuous position to have when the data on the ground really shows something very, very different. The history tells us something very different. So how do we come to terms with the reality on the ground and the illusions that we want people to continue to live in, right? So that requires honesty. We have to be honest about everything that's going on in this country. And then once we are honest about it, and we can move forward as a nation, because ultimately I truly believe that we as a nation of people have more in common than not. I believe we really do want to grow and be the best nation in the world as we claim to be, but we're not there yet. And so when we are honest about that, then we can say, okay, so how do we fix it? However, I do believe that there are concerted efforts being made to do that right now on a more deliberate efforts. And a lot of it has to do with technology, modernization, advancement of human beings, our enlightenment. We're just getting better at being human beings, but we're just not there yet. So we have our work cut out for us, that's for sure. But honesty has to be part of the antidote to fix this this problem we're facing in America and all across the
But what
world.
but what would you say to someone that, I mean, so along that veins of honesty, honestly, that there are people who are part of this country who believe that we don't have a problem. Everything is working out just fine for them,
Right.
and this perspective doesn't really make sense. So I would think that part of what we would have to do is somehow we'd have to change that. I mean, before we would have a chance for real change, we would have to get them to understand a different perspective. Would everyone
But
agree with that?
I think you're talking about the people who stormed the Capitol. I mean, like
Well,
those
not just
people.
them.
Well,
Well,
yeah, I mean,
similar. I'm being a little facetious here, but
yeah,
you know, the people who who deny that America have a problem are those who choose to be willfully ignorant about the truth and about the reality on the ground. I mean, all you have to do is look at history. But then again, when it comes to solutions, so I believe that in order for us to reach these people who refuse to recognize the status of this country, I believe that's where education comes in. You know, we talk, education is such a big, important tool. But we have to reconstruct our education system. We have a Common Core, which is a common, a common level of study for every single person in this country, right? Unless you go to private school or something and they can pay more for your education. But once we target the education system, I really believe we can reach more people. We can we can really shape hearts and minds who can lead us into a better future. But we have to also recognize that those who are making the curriculum, those who are teaching the curriculums, are white people, mostly 83% of educators are white. You know, that's a problem when majority of the children that they're teaching are black inner city kids. It's just, that's just the way it is. So when we start to look at these issues as problems, and then we can apply solutions.
So, well, something related to that, which because I think in trying to boil down these very weighty issues and trying to find the lowest common denominator. Um, I believe it was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who said, and I certainly believe, and this is the premise of my thinking, that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere.
Right.
And we we have to get to that mindset that it is to everyone's benefit that we stamp out injustice, because we can't be as strong as we can be as long as there is injustice anywhere in our society. And we have to get to the point where we can acknowledge that certain societal advantages exist that are not to the long-term benefit of our country, because it excludes, you know, large segments of our society from achieving the full benefits of participation
Mhm.
in our society. We can't ask people to go out and serve, and then they do so, and then when they come home, they can't live where they want to live. They can't, get a job where they want to get a job at. They can't have the careers that they want to have. If if we're all going to be in this together, then we all have to have, you know, be able to participate in the benefits together. And at least have the opportunity. And I want to, there's the common phrase that and I don't want this to devolve into a political discussion, but there's a common phrase that conservatives use against liberals, and which is, that liberals we're trying to guarantee success, and that is, I think that's totally and patently false. What we're trying to guarantee is opportunity, that if you're willing to truly put in the work, truly do that, you have an opportunity to benefit from your labors. So if there is this inequity, this stacked deck, if you will, how do we fix that? What's the prescription for that?
The question is, um, how do we how do we address the odds against us? How do we
Yes.
address the odds against us? I think, in in my opinion, I believe we have to start to imagine the America we want. I think we have to start to do that. So You're right. There are certain people who will refuse to see that America is a racist country, that America is a country built on the backs of slaves, that Jim Crow existed, that it was just 50 years ago that they marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I mean, these are historical facts, so we cannot deny those. So now, and throughout history, especially the last 50 years, we have, as activists have been out there, yelling, marching, screaming, fighting, protesting, boycotting, doing all kinds of things to say, hey, there's a problem, right? We've done that. We've announced there's a problem. We've told them there's a problem. We keep saying there's a problem. Now we have cameras to show them there's a problem. Like, see what we've been saying all along? Billie Holiday sang about strange fruit. Do you remember that? Let that sink in for a second. Can you imagine you as a Black person in this country having to sing a song called Strange Fruit about dead bodies, Black people being lynched in an audience of only white people? And you can't walk through that front door to sing that song. You got to go through the back door. And none of your people can be there with you because they're not allowed because they're Black. All right? So when you find yourself in a world singing to your oppressor about the lynched bodies on trees, and then you refer to them as fruit, strange fruit, talk about fake news. Fake news didn't show up with Trump. Fake news didn't show up with Trump. We've been trying for ages to say, hey, don't believe. What are you going to believe? Your lying eyes or what I'm saying to you? I think we've had enough of that. So let's get away from trying to hide the truth. Let's get away from trying to make it PC, and let's be honest. And then start to imagine the world we actually want. And then let's start to work towards that world, deliberately create opportunities, make the playing ground more fair, let it be more equitable, right? There's equality and then there's equity. We can't all do the same thing, but we can be equitable in our humanity. We have the power to do that. So I believe we have to start being, so our fight has to be solution based, not just let's march, let's do this, let's highlight the issues. We've done that. Now, as a collective movement, let's talk about the solutions that will address these problems that we've been talking about for generation and generation and generation. So when we talk about solutions, that's how I see it, and that's where that honesty conversation has to come in,
I think I'm going to press on that just a little. And here's the thought that comes to me, and then I'm going to get Harv and Randy in on this here. Um, I think we have to first accept the premise that none of us are immune to this problem, and I will demonstrate um, a point. There is a view, um, not by all, but by some in the African American community, that hey, look what happened here, um, and to be honest, well, to be clear, I should say, the anti-Asian American hate bill has not, it's not law yet. It has passed the Senate, which is um, amazing in itself, but
Mhm.
it has to go back to the House. Um, there are many, you could go online, social media, and there are many African Americans who are expressing um well, concern is not strong enough, who are who
Displeasure.
displeasure, yes.
Yes, that's it. Displeasure.
Yeah, displeasure
That's a good word.
that's
Let's
a
use that.
better word.
Let's use that.
That, hey, how come this bill moved so quickly? They've only been going through this for a year, and we've been going through this for 400 years. How come it's moving so fastly for them?
Mhm.
I strongly and vehemently disagree with that. And one of the, I ask all of you to bear with me for 1 second. Um, I'm not a person that believes in heroes, and I don't do a whole lot of hero worship, but one human being that I did hold in high regard was for John Lewis. And what made him such an iconic figure to me was not the work that he did for civil rights in regards specifically to African Americans. You would expect someone who is of the group that they are fighting for to fight hard for that. He did that. But in 1997, he stood on the floor of the House and gave an impassioned speech as to why Democrats should support gay rights. Now, this was at a time when gay rights were not popular. And he knew that, a lot of his constituents had deeply held religious beliefs that, that view would be problematic. But he stood up for that because it doesn't, a lot of times our view of history or our view of our perception of justice depends upon whose ox is being gored, as the old saying is. So we haven't been looking at what's been happening, but if you go back, like the New Yorker published an article on March 25th about the history of violence against Asian Americans in this country. I suggest people go read that. I suggest PBS has a series of I either it has aired or will air called Asian Americans. I suggest you go see that. This is not something new. This is not something that's been happening just for a year. The article in the New Yorker talks about the murder of Vincent Chen. This happened back in the 80s.
I did a term paper on that actually.
Yes.
So
So violence against this is not something that just we have. This has been a persistent problem, and the first thing we have to accept that that it has been a problem for all of us. Again, going back to that what I said earlier, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And we can't start this, crabs in the barrel thing, like, well, how dare you jump in front of the line for me? And I hope, Randy, you don't mind if I pick on you. But tell me, your thoughts on that.
well, first off, it actually goes further back than that. It actually goes back as far as 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act, where being Chinese, you weren't allowed to be a Chinese American. For me, I had that uncomfortable situation. I'm sorry I'm getting emotional, but this actually makes a lot of sense to me because, I'm Chinese and I'm American. I shouldn't have to choose if I wanted to be Chinese today or American today, depending on where I go to school, who my friends are, what neighborhood I grew up in, right? I'm human. And I think at the end of the day, that's all that matters. And I do agree with Jeanette that we need to have that uncomfortable conversation first. I think it's people are avoiding that conversation. I see people where there's the bucket of not just there isn't a problem, but also it's not my problem. It's everyone's problem because it's who I'm a year away from getting married, and my fiance and I had a serious conversation on do we want to have children? And not because we can't, but because do we want to raise them in the world that we live in right now? And it's an honest conversation that I never thought I would have with her. How am I going to teach my kids about what's going on? How am I going to teach even my nephews, my niece, about why it's okay? Not that it's okay, but it's made to be okay to be openly racist now, right? Racism has always, been in existence, but now people make it okay. And that's what hurts the most for me is that, every time my 75-year-old mother walks out the house, I'm worried about her. I have her call me every hour, and I shouldn't have to do that, right? I should feel safe. Like this podcast is a safe space for the four of us to speak. My home, my neighborhood, that should all be safe spaces. And for me, it hasn't been just a year. I'm 37 years old. When I grew up in a more, as my parents did better, they moved us out of the more predominantly Asian neighborhoods and said, okay, we have to assimilate. We have to be quote unquote more white. And I didn't understand what that meant, but that meant just moving into more, less urban neighborhoods, things like that. Like, so only speak English, only eat American food. But what does that? I didn't know what that meant. And it wasn't until, later on in my 20s where I realized, I'm proud of my heritage, proud of who I am, but I should have always been proud of who I was from the day that I was brought into this world. So for me, it's more than just a year. And then, Greg, when you mentioned, the the online social media like forums where people say, well, we've been going through this for a year. No, I think it's been a lot longer, but I think it's just more recently that it's become more openly spoken about or openly talked about. So for me, it's it's hard to talk about this. And again, I'm sorry that I'm getting emotional, but it's just it's an everyday thing now. It's always been, but I think we were able to kind of suppress it. But now it's
And
just overwhelming, to say the least.
I thank you for sharing that, and that definitely um, helps our discussion. And the point that I'm trying to make to even people of color, and this is an important point, we ourselves are not immune to racism. And that's what I want to, like, what I found disturbing, extremely disturbing, is you can go on social media and you can see many examples of African Americans committing violence against Asian Americans. We should be the last people on earth who want to,
Right.
who are engaging in something like this. And we can't pretend. And I heard, I saw, I should say, online people say, oh, well, we can't be racist. Oh, yes, we can. And some of us are. And what I'm trying to get at is that I believe, my theory, that there's something innate in all of us, right? That before I can do serious harm to you, there's like a little programming in my brain that says, no, if I think of you as an equal, I can't go out and, you know, bash your brains in, because that's equal to bashing my brains in. And I wouldn't want someone to do that to me. So the first step that has to happen, and this has been happening since the beginning of time and since we've had war, is I've got to find a way to make you other. I can't make you like myself, because if I think you're just like me, I'm not going to want to harm you. And if I need to, for whatever reason, because of lack of resources or whatever, I need something that you have. And I've got to convince all these people that, hey, we've got to go and get this something. Well, the first thing I got to do is convince that the people that have the something don't deserve that something, that somehow it was ill-gotten gain, or they're somehow less than other. I've got to
Right.
demonize the opponent. That is very critical. Um, and what I'm saying to everyone is, we have to look at all the incidents in our society. This is why I don't tell ethnic jokes, because that's how it starts. It's that desensitization
Right.
of someone else as an other. I don't tell stories that focus on it, because it's not necessary. And especially when you look at the genocide that happened in Rwanda, you know that's a textbook of how you get one part of society to turn against another part of society, and that's how it happened. And that's why we're talking about it on this podcast, because the media had a role to play in that, in casting the one side as cockroaches, which was the kind, and that's how it started. And I'm saying that none of us here are immune to that problem. And that's why we've got to start thinking bigger. I would hope we as human beings would get to the point where we realize, we can't keep falling for this. That in order to for someone who wants something to get other people to go along with them en masse, there's usually this demonization effort that has to be involved. And that's the seeds of racism. You know, human beings committed the unpardonable sin of enslaving other human beings.
Right.
In order for us to make that palatable, to that we could commit such a horrible crime and get millions of people to be absolutely okay with it, the lie had to be introduced. Oh, well, it's okay that we're enslaving these folks because, you know, they're subhuman, they're not that smart, they're
Right.
whatever. That's how it begins.
Right.
And none of us, that's my point. Particularly this year has been, you know, this past 2 years really has been such an illuminating year for many people because they've been home and they've had time to focus on this. So now let me pivot a little bit, and because again, that's the benefit of having this panel is we get diverse perspectives. And Harv, what are your thoughts on all this?
I'm glad you picked on me because as you were talking, I was looking at our panel here, and it occurred to me that, we have some representation. And as you all were talking, Randy was saying, Asian, Chinese, Jeanette, you were saying black, Greg, you were saying black. And it just occurred to me that, I think part of the problem is, as you pointed out, Greg, it's one part of society gets to go against and sort of encourages the bad actions against another race or part of society. And as you were all talking, I was thinking, geez, I've been around the world a bit, and I've seen racism in multiple forms. And the thing that always struck me was we're all part of the human race. There's only 5 genetic pools in the whole world that all started in Africa. So we're all out of Africa, right? I mean, historically, the genetic pools all started there. But as you were all talking, I was thinking, okay, so what is it that makes you black? What is it that makes you Asian? What is it that makes you Latina, Latinx? I mean, if you go through the process and interracial marriage, I'll bring it up. I'll just put it out there. At what point do those interracial kids lose their identity? Are they black? Are they Latin? Are they Chinese? Are they white? And what is it about society that reinforces that we're not all humans, that we're all not just the human race? You know, and I've often said this as a joke. I think that, but as I thought about it, what started out as a joke is probably more true than I realized. And it was, I don't think we'd come together as a human race until we had a threat outside the human race. Because then we would be able to say, oh, there's the bad guy. There's the people who are trying to oppress us. So, I'm thinking that, I've been hearing everything about how you're treated as a part of your race, and it's one group of society against another. But what about the interracial children? Where do they identify? Where do they fit? How do we treat those people? And I think that we should focus as the people listening to this podcast, you know, are you still X if you're only 50%? Are you still X if you're 30%? Are you still X if you're 10%? And I think that's part of the problem. I think that society actually likes to put people into a column and sort of pit one part of society against the other part of society. And I think if everybody were treated equally from birth, we wouldn't be in this situation. And I wish I had some answers, but I'd like the panel to comment, how we identify our race. What is it that makes us that part of race? And in your mind, what would make you whatever race you are if you were X percentage? I mean,
Well,
is there a limit when you cease to be a part of that race because you're only 5% of that race, or do you still identify if you're only 5%?
well,
To me, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking we're all human race, so it ought to be equitable. What is it about what I've said in terms of where's that line that we can stop pitting one part of society against the other? How do we get rid of that line and focus on treating everybody as humans?
well,
I really like how I like that question, and it really connects to the solutions part, because if you've noticed, as we mark history, if you notice, it wasn't until there were really interracial children, it wasn't until that somebody felt that pain,
Thomas
that they're like,
Jefferson had, you know,
you know what, so it almost you have to walk a mile in somebody's shoes in order for you to
right.
really understand and feel and know what they're going through. And that has everything to do with race and race relations as well. And I am of mixed heritage. I have a white father and a black mother. Okay, so this has been my life. We used to go to restaurants, and I used to be mortified because I would be afraid to call my father, just having conversations like, "Hey, Dad," blah 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 blah, and the look she would get, because although I look
Judgment.
like, yeah, I look like my father, but he's a white man with blue eyes. My mother is very dark skinned, very African looking, but I look like her too. If you look I look like her daughter. But when we would go out into society, the questions was like, what are you? Like, where do you belong? Are those your kids? Like, they never, like, there's no way you could have black children. There was just this discombobulation. And then I would be rejected as a person in my peer group. It would be like, why do you talk like that? Why is this white man picking you up from school? Who is he? There's no way that's your father. You look black. Yeah, right. So as a child as a person of a mixed heritage, like literally black and white, it was very difficult for me, because and even in the black community, it was like, well, you're not really 100%. It was like I was on the outskirts looking in, even though I'm like, no, really, I belong
Yeah.
here. They were like, well, and then on the white side, I was like, yeah, sorry, you can't, there's no room, how you stick out like a sore thumb. And even in your own family, it is a very difficult thing. But
And
it
that's
is,
exactly my point, Jeanette. It's society is trying to
It's
put us
this.
in this column. And
Well,
go ahead,
yeah,
it's
Christy.
society that's trying to compartmentalize who we
yeah.
are. And I think they make it acceptable, even though it's not supposed to be. Because think about all the surveys, the health forms we sign. There's always the age, sex, what race are you? And it doesn't say you can check multiple boxes. You kind of have to check one or other.
Yeah.
My nephews went through this. They're half Chilean, half Chinese. They're not Chilean enough to be Hispanic, but they're not Chinese enough to be accepted by the Chinese community. And it's all about, it goes back to Jeanette's original point, where it's education, not just education in the classroom, because their mother, my sister, is an educator. So it's not just education in the classroom, but it's also education at home. It's education all around, not just what they learn from books, but what they're taught by their friends, by their family. And I think the education system in our country does need to be fixed for that to happen. I think that's number one. Why? Because my nephews are in martial arts. As soon as they started taking martial arts, my sister asked them, out of all the kids in the room, what do you see as the differences? Their answer was, oh, he's taller, he's shorter, right? Oh,
Hmm.
he has long hair. Race
Hmm.
did not even play a role. And that's because that's how they were educated and that's how they were taught. And now that they're teenagers, you see that their group of friends and the people they associate with, multiple ethnicities, male, female, non-binary, it doesn't matter anymore. It's how they were educated and how they were taught, not just again in the classroom, the extracurriculars, also at home. They no longer had to compartmentalize who they were and their feelings and their all of that. They were just human. And I think that's the problem with society, is that you're always asked to make a choice, no matter what we do, right? You're asked or told to make a choice, And what you even think about it, you go to school, they tell you have to choose a major. You have to decide on what you want to be and what you want to do early on. It's always about, making this like forcing decisions. And I think that's a big problem.
Well, look at Tiger Woods or
Mhm.
Kamala Harris, two very good examples. So are they Asian or are they black? You see,
Mhm.
both sides wants them to choose. Okay, so is Tiger Woods the first black professional golfer to win the Master, or is he the first Asian professional golfer to win the Master? Why do we never speak in terms of heritage?
Because
Okay,
it's convenient, right? It's
right.
it's he's an Asian American golfer when he wins because it's convenient at that point. Again, being Asian American, that's what we, when he won the Masters in '97, my father went bananas. And my father went bonkers. And he was like, an Asian guy won the Masters. He's darker, but he's an Asian American, right? He's half Asian. And
See, and
he
I
went
think that's part of the problem,
but he went
Greg. I think
bonkers. And I
that's
told my dad, I said, no, but I told my dad, I said, but he's just that great of a golfer. And my dad's like, no, 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 no. He's Asian. He's a minority. He's half black, half Asian. He won. And then it wasn't until later on he realized, he kind of, when he calmed down from emotions, he said, yes, he's an amazing golfer. You should be like him, right? Well, this is before all the scandals and stuff, but he was like, you should be like him. But that's the thing, it was a win for minorities, and I think that's how we need to see it.
Or
But we focus on what's convenient at the point, like at that time.
absolutely. Or even, dare I venture into sacred territory, even Barack Obama, all right? We
Right.
love to call him the first black president. But hello, ladies and gentlemen, his mother was white. Okay? It's like we totally wanted to ignore that part of his family. Yeah, she was white. But his dad was from Kenya, and he is black. And I thought, because and it 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 didn't hit me until I saw this commentary by a Canadian person who was saying, like, but isn't he half white? I don't get it. Everybody was making such a big deal. And obviously for African Americans, yes, it's a very big deal that someone that looks like me sat in that office. But
Mhm.
I never disavowed or not didn't acknowledge the fact that he was a part of an interracial marriage. That's part of who he is. That's part of what his makeup. And so my hope is that, I think the first step is that we have to realize that there's a bit of gaming the system. In order to get people to go along with things, we get conditioned to be a part of certain tribes. Because again, it's a matter of culminating power. And how do I do that? Classic example, George Wallace, who would say, he would go, he would have, these policy speeches and talk about what he wanted to do. Nobody cared. When he started screaming segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation, they went nuts for it. And that's the path that he went down. And I'm saying is that, and believe you me, I'm saying this as a person who has been a victim of this. I think back to, um, you know, uh, when my mother, when she was alive, was a nurse's assistant, and she worked the night shift, and she would get off at 11 o'clock, and I was keenly nervous that she would come home at night, and she couldn't. So a lot of times one of her coworkers would give her a ride home, but there were occasions where she had to take the bus home. And this was in the Bronx, and now she was in Pelham Bay, and if you know anything about the Bronx, um that's not things have changed somewhat, but that at that time, that wasn't the most integrated part of the Bronx. Okay, and that's where she worked. And standing there, waiting for the bus, minding her own business, not doing anything, these group of white children, driving in a car, stopped by, and they started yelling some words at my mom. And my mom was not a person who was deeply involved in, she was very disturbed by that. She came home crying. I tell you, it is a good thing that I did not own a firearm because I wanted to go out and find them and kill them. I really did. Because of the way they made my mother feel. And she did nothing wrong. She was
Yeah.
standing there
Right.
waiting on a bus to go home. So I understand the passion that comes from being a victim of this problem. But what I want to also encourage people to do is to say, we have to realize we're still all in this. People, if you're on the other side of this, and if you're white, you grew up in a system that taught you that you have certain advantages, and these advantages are genetically given to you. That's everything in your world kind of goes to reinforce that. So it is no wonder that people come out believing that. Because again, where we started, if you tell children something, that's what they're
Right.
going to grow up believing.
Right. You teach them. It's not innate. You're not born that
No,
way.
it's not,
You're taught. So,
we've all
So, but I also want to say that when we talk about when you mentioned interracial kids and whatnot, and where do you belong? That is a product. That outcome is part of racism. It's a product of racism because and it's also a historical narrative. If you think, because in this country, slave owners were having sex with their slaves, and then they were
Right.
taking these children and saying they're mine. They were like, okay, but they were nicer to those slaves. Some of our forefathers had slaves. However, the rule was if you have 1% black, you're black. You see what I'm saying? So
Well, that's
the
exactly
rules,
what I was asking,
it was set.
Jeanette.
Sorry.
That's exactly what I was asking
Yeah,
earlier.
it's
Is
right.
what
So that's what,
percentage?
yes, that's
So if
what.
you
Mhm.
so you exactly proved my point. If you're 1% black, you're black,
That's right.
according to the way they were treated.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of for our podcast listeners. Obviously, I'll get the white perspective. so, so one of the things that always amazed me growing up white, when you ask, like, if you ask a white person, what are they? They don't say, "Oh, I'm white." They'll say, "I'm Italian, I'm German, I'm Irish." And I think that sort of reinforces the American culture here. It's all about dividing us, putting us in groups. And I think hopefully the podcast listeners will sort of think about that and figure out how we get to a solution, because I'd like us as a group to come up with a solution. But you're 1% black, you're always black. But I guarantee you, each of our podcast listeners, go up to a white person and say, "What are you?" And see how many say, "I'm white." They'll say, "I'm Italian. I'm this, I'm that, I'm Irish." And growing up, I would hear, "Oh yeah, the gangsters are all this ethnicity. Oh, the cops are all this ethnicity." It wasn't that they were white or black or Latino or Asian. It was even segmented, like you pointed out, Jeanette, the interracial children. They were always black. And it happens within the white community. If they're 10% X, when somebody asks them what they are, they don't say, "Oh, I'm white." They'll say, "I'm this nationality." I mean, my family's been in this country since the mid 1800s, and people ask me, "Well, what are you?" I'm an American. That's what I usually say. But I mean, my brother had our ethnicity done, and I forget what the percentage was, but it was more than 1%, Randy, Japanese. But I don't consider myself Asian because I'm 1% Japanese. But Jeanette, you made a good point. If you're black, if you're 1% black, you're considered black. And I think there's something in that
Yeah.
we have to examine it. And why is that? What can we do?
Yeah.
And how can we fix the problem?
You have to
Well,
change
what
the
was the
narrative.
Structure. That's
well,
the
what was
structure
the
of racism we
right?
talked about before. I that's a structure of racism we talked about before. But I wanted to also take you mentioned, Harv, you said white people don't just say white. I must disagree with that because if you look at the evolution of the word white, right? What it means to be white. it actually changed. Historically speaking, white people used to call themselves, when they were pilgrims and they came over, they called themselves, oh, I'm from this region. They were Italians, they were Scottish, they were Irish, they were all these different cultural sect of a European nation. However, when as racism grew and it became lucrative, and
Yes.
we were able to not only find money in dehumanizing mostly Black people and other people of color as well, but what these people that you say call themselves Italians, they went from calling themselves Italians, you say, actually, we're white, because white became a state of mind, like Malcolm X said. That means I'm young, 21, and I'm the boss. When somebody says I'm white, that means you're the boss. That's what it means in this day and age. So white people are going around connecting themselves to their Scottish roots, their Irish roots, or whatnot, unless it's, they're celebrating that on a specific occasion. But for the most part, there is power in being white. There's white supremacy, right? There's that whole idea. So they hold on to that. But the word white is an evolutionary thing in history. These white people never called themselves whites before. It wasn't until they were able to solidify their power as one people against the rest of the world is when they became white. Before that, they were Italians, they were Scottish, they were Irish. But now the word white means I'm the boss. And so it's going to be very, so once we are honest about that, once we call a thing, like Ian Vincent likes to say, then we can say, okay, that's what it is. And then we can start to deconstruct the structure of racism piece by piece. Honestly, just like you constructed it, let's deconstruct. And that's where it comes in when we talk about reparations. That's where reparations come in. Listen, the Germans paid reparations for World War II. They paid reparations. To this day, members of Congress, they're writing legislation to make sure that survivors, Holocaust survivors, and their descendants are getting all the art that was looted from them. To this day, there's 4 or 5 legislation in the book, not just to go after Nazi looted art in America, but all over the world. There's actually legislation that says anywhere there is Nazi looted art, it will come back, whether it's in a museum in Europe, in a museum at the Smithsonian, it doesn't matter. So there are concerted efforts being made to make other nationalities and other heritage groups whole again. However, somehow they forgot that we still need to be whole Black people. You know what I mean? As we are progressing, that's why there's still this uncomfortableness, right? That's why Blacks on social media are saying, wait a second, how is there an anti-Asian crimes bill? Here we are, like, what? You know what I'm saying? So yes, it's all anecdotal. However, but there's some the emotions of that reality is there, and that's what creates that disconnect, the bitterness. That's like, and that feeds into that, and the Asian hate. Listen, and then they also talk about, and if you look at the Civil Rights Act, it wasn't just for Black people, it was for everybody. Yes. It was for everybody. And so when people take an issue with, hey, you're protecting Armenians, they don't recognize. Well, guess what? In the Black community, we're saying the Black Holocaust is still ongoing. So when is this country in the world going to recognize our trauma? Officially, when will we get a wreath laid on us? When will we have all these monuments? When will we be recognized in the world? Especially when we have done so much to make this country what it is. The foundation of this country, this country is the most richest country in the world, the most powerful country in the world, because of our ancestors. All right. And so that has to be recognized. And once we recognize that, then we can start to feel better. It's like when you have a problem at home, you're fighting with your husband, you're fighting with your wife, your children, you go to a mediator, you go to a therapist, and that therapist allows people to come to you. Okay, you say you're safe. Then, okay, I actually didn't know you felt that way. Oh, you know what I mean? Right. So once we have an opportunity to air out our grievances, which we've been doing for the last 50, 60 years, right? And even before that, Frederick Douglass did a great job of doing all of that. All of our Black masters did all of that, right? So, but we still have more work to do. They're still not recognizing it. You know what I mean? But when we see that anti-Asian hate is being recognized, we feel we feel a little bitter. When we see that the Armenian genocide is being recognized, it's like, oh, wait a second, you know what I mean? We want that too. We don't want. Listen, we shouldn't hate anybody. That's wrong. Greg earlier talked about Black people should be the last ones to commit crimes against Asians, considering what has been done to them. I couldn't agree with that more. And I will say the same thing about the Jewish people, especially Jews for Trump. They marched in Brooklyn. They marched and they came out, and they are incredibly racist towards the Ethiopian Jews that live in Israel. All right, and they're fighting and supporting Israel. They should also be reprimanded in the same way. They should be the last people to be supporting someone like Donald Trump, who has divided people, who has inflamed racism and so forth. So we're all complicit. We all have a role to play in fixing our country, but we're not going to go anywhere unless we recognize the problems that continue to separate us, that continue to put us against each other. You know what I mean? That's just where I'm at with it. I just wanted to share that.
Jeanette, I'd love to get your thoughts on the reparations that were made in South Africa about apartheid. Now, I know I can almost guess that it didn't go far enough. It didn't do, what it should have done. Is there anything we can learn from that they had right, or did anything in their efforts in the reparations for apartheid? Or just give me your perspective on how that was done, and if there's anything we can learn from that particular exercise.
I would stay far away from that. If we're looking for a pilot program,
that's not it.
That ain't it, because all you have to do is just look at what's happening right there now. Apartheid is still alive and well. It's just wearing a different outfit. Okay, they're still suffering in that region. It is terrible. But here's what we should look at. Let's look at Germany. Germany paid billions. As a matter of fact, it's in 2010 or 2000, I believe, that they made their last reparation payment.
It was supposed to be 2010, but they went actually beyond that a little bit too.
But since then, since World War II, they came up with the plan, the Treaty of Versailles, right? They came up with the plan, and they said, so if there's a model that we need to follow, that's the one that we need to follow. If it worked for the Germans, if it worked to make Jewish people whole again, to make white Jewish people whole again, then certainly we can use that same program to make Black people in this country whole again as well. So when we talk about solutions, let's look at these models that have been successful. I mean, even apologies. They've apologized for the Japanese internment camp. Obama, the first Black president, went all the way to Hiroshima to lay a wreath when we dropped the bomb. A Black man did that for this country. You see what I'm saying?
It's admitting that fault. You have to admit the fault. You have to recognize that there's a problem. Right? Before you have a solution, there has to be that recognition. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, is the Germans recognized it was the recognition of what was wrong, what is currently wrong, and what has to be changed.
Repent.
And we've never really dealt with that in our
Nobody
country.
wants to have they don't want to have that uncomfortable conversation.
Right.
Because then what happens is, when you have that uncomfortable conversation, someone has to accept responsibility, and that's what they don't want to do. Right? And it's kind of like passing the hot potato. It's like, it's not on us.
And the refrain that I hear all the time, and fortunately, I think George, for some reason, the George Floyd's murder has seemed to open the door to that. But prior to that, the refrain that I would hear a lot was, well, hey, I never owned slaves, or my family didn't own slaves, so, this has nothing to do with us. If you're a human being on this planet, you're involved in this. You've either benefited by the structure that is, or you've suffered because of the structure that is. But there's no you can't be on the fence about this. If you're alive and you're in this world, you're affected by this. And what I would say to people, and I say to myself, because before I would have a sense of hopelessness that this was never going to be resolved. But as I get older and I learn more about history and I learn more about the origins of all of this, is if we could educate people to the point where we can get them to understand what happened. Like I saw, the reaction of young white people when they watched The Watchmen and they saw the pilot episode. And in the pilot episode, they touch upon the Tulsa riots. Now that wasn't fiction. It was a fictionalized account of something that happened. But I mean, to see it was like, whoa, that's horrible. But when they learned, oh no, that happened, they were horrified. That I mean, even I didn't know that the first aerial attack that the United States suffered was in the Tulsa riots. They used airplanes to bomb the community, and they totally destroyed that community. Now, we have to understand and learn our history, and then we have to, once we, okay, yes, acknowledge the atrocity, but why did this happen? What were the roots at? What I want people to be is, and I'm not totally on board with, I don't know if this can ever happen. But I want us to learn how to guard against being manipulated, against being manipulated into evil. And unfortunately, human beings seem to be remarkably susceptible, and it doesn't matter, your wealth, your education level. Um, there seems to be some kind of path if you have the right individual with the right set of charisma and other personal characteristics, you can get humans to do almost anything, and that's what scares me. But I'm hoping that somehow, if people at least know that about ourselves, then we must always be vigilant. No good will ever come from embracing evil and hating anytime you hate another human being for no other reason, for the way they look or where they come from, that is evil. And as long as there's evil anywhere on this earth, there's evil everywhere. Now you have our COVID-19 situation. Yes, America has done a great job of going from, having poorly supplied vaccine. Now we have a surplus. We have an abundance. Fortunately, we have an administration that helped us. Had a plan. We got up there, but we can't stop there, because if the virus is raging in Brazil, then sooner or later there's going to be a variant that comes out of there, or a variant that comes out of India, that these vaccines don't handle. And then we're right back. So as long as the virus is not controlled anywhere on this earth, it's not controlled everywhere on this earth. So we truly have to think, as a planet, on this. And I know that there are efforts, and that's, it was a global effort to come up with the vaccine. But unfortunately, it's not, the distribution is not global, at least not yet. So my point being is, I hope, or better yet, maybe I'll ask it as a question. How do we get human beings to see that it is in our collective interest to resist attempts to make us hate other people?
I think you have to know why people are hating. There's always a reason why people are hating, right? And it usually has to do with the whole idea of survival, because man, we're biological living things. We're beings, right? Our main purpose is to survive, like a plant, every other, thing. We need to survive, right? And if my survival means I got to step on you, I got to hurt you, I got to hate you, I got to take from you, if that means that I will not only survive, that's good. So it starts out with survival, but then it becomes to power. Not only can I survive, but I can be powerful if I can take more from you, if I can use my might to take what you have. So then might turns to right. Okay. So it's that mindset, we have to kind of address and get away from, that it's just, it's I don't know, it's just unnatural though, like if you look at how the function of nature is, the goal is to survive, right? There's a cycle of life. You live, you give, you da da da, the circle, the ecosystem, right? The ecosystem for human beings has been infected with white supremacy, right? One group in this ecosystem said that their might was right, even though it caused the ecosystem of humanity to become imbalanced. So we are currently living in an imbalanced ecosystem as far as human beings, because one group use their might to take from one place. So if we want to rebuild our ecosystem, we have to address the issue of white supremacy, and we have to address the issue of global equality. We have to look at what we do all over the world, and even it touches on the issue of immigration. Randy talked about his mom or his parents. I don't know. Even let's talk about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris's mother, when she immigrated to this country, she put down that she was white. Although she and I probably have the same skin color, but she put herself as a white woman because that was more lucrative. That would add to her survival in this country. She needed to survive. So we have to look at all these different nodes that causes people to make certain decisions that puts our human ecosystem out of balance. So when I talk about the solutions, we have to look at all these different nodes that cause the imbalances, and then go back and readjust accordingly. I mean, that's just how I'm trying to look at it. And you talked about the bombing. This country, that wasn't the only bombing that they did from the plane. Remember the MOVE? Right after the Black Panther, there was another group that formed called MOVE, MOVE. They bombed the whole freaking neighborhood in Chicago.
I remember that.
Neighborhood. They dropped bombs. The Chicago police would support the FBI, and they literally dropped bombs in the neighborhood. They killed, I don't know, about 7 kids. They killed 5 members of MOVE and all these kids. So, when you look at Black people and you don't have a problem brutalizing us in this way, then you no longer see us as human beings, right? But that's a long time coming. They had to dehumanize us to usher in slavery, but that narrative continues. So we're fighting to be recognized to this day. Like, see me not just as a human being, but as an American, as a Black person, as a rightful child of this country. You know what I mean? I mean, that's what we have to get to, that recognition. We have to not just recognize our humanity, but recognize the trauma that has been caused on us. We're watching the rest of the world benefit from the fruits of our ancestors' labors to this day. To this day, we watch everybody benefit from the fruits of our ancestors' labor. We must say that. We have to say that, but not with bitterness, but with honesty, and say, okay, now let's be equitable about it. Let's create opportunities for the most vulnerable people, the most traumatized people in the world. Let's purposely, deliberately create opportunities through reparations to make them whole again. Because if we don't, then it goes to what you talk about with the MLK quote. We will perish as fools if we cannot live as brothers and sisters. That's just, that is a simple truth. Okay. And that's where I stand on that.
Randy, you wanted to get in on that?
No, it was just saying that I agree, and that again, goes back to my original point. I don't feel I should ever have to choose when I want to be Chinese, when I want to be American. Like when is it convenient for me? I'm a human being, and at the end of the day, that's all that matters, right? Is coming together as a collective unit, and seeing that we're all humans. When I see the 4 of us on this panel, I see 4 smart, successful creative individuals. I don't see someone who's black, someone who's white, and I think it's a problem that we all have because, you know, I encountered somebody at some, I forgot where I was, but at an event, and the news was on, and this was earlier today. The news was on. They were talking about the attack on the Asian American in Harlem yesterday,
Oh, I didn't
and
hear that.
yeah, so he's 61 years old. He got attacked in Harlem. It was terrible.
Yeah, it's
He was out
terrible.
just collecting cans. He was just
Yeah,
trying to make ends meet. But anyway, so I look at
exactly.
this guy. We're talking, and in my mind, I'm thinking this guy he has no idea. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what we're going through. He was a middle-aged white guy, and he turns to me. He goes, "Yeah, this is terrible. My wife is Chinese. I can't imagine what she's going through, what her family's going through." And that put me in my place. Like we weren't talking about it, but mentally it put me in my place. So it is a problem that we all have to encounter. It's a us problem, right? It's not a you problem. It's not a me. It's an us problem. And I think that's the importance. It's recognizing the problem and just to saying, there is a problem. Trying to figure out how to solve the problem together. Not you do the work or I do the work, but we have to learn how to solve the problem together collectively. So.
Harv, you have any final thoughts as we wrap up our discussion?
Yeah, I agree with identifying the problem and making reparations. And there's a part of me that's sort of still nagging, sort of tugging me. Is I think we have to come together as a human race. I think to our podcast listeners, I'm not quite sure if we have any Native American Indians or any Latinx listening, but just as you pointed out, Randy, it's currently has the visibility of Black and Asian, and I'm a little bit concerned that that reparations are made, but how we stop the perpetuation of not treating everybody as humans, of not coming together as a human race. And I don't have any answers for our panel or our listeners, but certainly evil is bad, as we all know. And Greg, please don't edit this out, so I'll be obscure enough. There's a major studio who it was a very white lead who was very prominent in doing good. And the father of another Black do-gooder said, well, you could never be that person because you're Black. And the plot took a turn where the white guy became encouraged by evil. And guess who stepped into the role as the do-gooder? It was the Black lead. And to see, you could feel the emotion when the father saw his Black son finally get the good, the position, the stature, being Black. And you could see the emotion. Obviously, it was actors, but you could see the pride that went with his son finally getting the recognition that he should have deserved all along. So I'll clue you in. Our podcasters who are following me closely could probably guess what particular series I'm referring to, but it really struck home. And it was interesting to see now the white guy who everybody looked up to as the good do-gooder is now the evil person, and the Black person was there to save the world. On that note, I'll turn it back to Greg.
Well,
Well, Greg, before you end the show, Greg, one of the things I was hoping we could touch on is the role the media plays
yes.
in influencing all of this. And if I could throw out some figures real quick, because as we talk about how we improve our American culture collectively, I think we have to look at the role the media plays, because they're reflecting our lives back to us. They're creating the narrative, right? They're telling our story, okay? Usually without our consent. So, but they're telling it in a way that really makes one person the hero and the other person the villain, right? So, and so we have to touch on these things, because when TV shows, when 93% of the TV shows that are being written, 93% are being written by white people. White people write 93% of all the television shows. Television shows that most Americans sit in front of every single day and watch, and then that's their idea of what America is, right? From the Leave It to Beaver to, Living Single, a bunch of Black women living together, written by white men. Books we read, 90% of the books we read are written by white people. So once we start to open the field and give Black writers more of a chance, that's a solution. News coverage, 85% of the news that is covered in this country is covered by a white person. Okay, so they're telling our story. The narrative is, every time, look at the neighbor, go to the hood. We can all say verbatim what a news reporter is going to say. You just have to look at Key and Peele. They do skits about it. They laugh about how a white journalist will cover a Black community versus how a Black journalist will cover a Black community, or an Asian person will cover Asian issues. Okay, so these things matter. When 80% of the news that's being covered is done by white people talking about other people, then we have to address that. Solution: music production. Look at the music. Look at how Black people have shaped music. Look at that. Look, K-pop, look at all the things. I mean, they're copying urban music. They're copying rap, hip hop. That has shaped our culture so much. It is absolutely incredible. But guess what? 95% of those behind the scenes are white. Okay, so the talent for the most part is Black. The ones that really shape the culture, that everybody wants to be like. You go to TikTok and all these dances they do, majority of them are created by the Black content creator. But who gets the credit? The white person. And it was just an example of it. It wasn't Jimmy Kimmel. It was another talk show host who brought a white TikTok dancer to literally be the face of all the other Black
Jimmy
content.
Fallon.
That Jimmy Fallon brought this white girl in to literally to be the face of what she stole from Black content creator. Guess what he had to do? He had to reverse that and bring, that was a solution. That was recognizing the problem, and that was a solution. But it took the people to say, they had to participate into that, right? So then there's also the top 100 directed top 100 grossing film. 95% of white people have directed the top 100 grossing films in this world, right? And yet, but a lot of it covers our narrative. So I'm talking about the things that are going on behind the scene, right? I'm talking about the powers. The real power are the Mitch McConnells, not the Bidens and the Harrises. Right there, those are the figureheads. The real power are, I'm speaking loosely, but I'm saying those who really make the decisions, you really hardly hear about them. The richest people, the billionaires in the world, top 10 are all white people. One woman on that list, but all, so once we recognize that data and embrace it, then we can use it to our advantage. And the media plays a role. We have to address the media. We have to say, hey, you must be accountable, not just in telling our stories, but in allowing us a seat at the table so we can also help create our story. We can tell our story. I can go to Randy's neighborhood and talk about the issues his community is facing. I can go to Harv's neighborhood and talk about the issues his community is facing. I can go I can only speak for myself in my experience. So solutions are there, but we have to be brave enough. We have to be willing to incorporate them, even if it means that you have to share your wealth and your space, because that's ultimately what it is, right? Everybody wants to survive. And once they survive, we all want to thrive. And we deserve that, especially when we have done so much to build this country and to make it what it is. We all deserve to do well in this country, every single one of us. And the current state is that we're not. Majority of the people who do well in this country are white. They have most of the opportunities. They take a huge deal of the wealth. The pie is split in their favor. So this movement is about making it more equitable. And we have to share the fruits of our labor, so we can have a real Thanksgiving. Every year we come together, we talk about, this is the harvest of our bounty. Black people have yet to really enjoy the harvest of their bounty. So it's about time that we do that. And all of these different steps and solutions will lead us there. I really truly believe that. I have so much hope for this country. I love this country. We do have an opportunity to be the best country in the world. We're not the best country in the world, but we have an opportunity to be the best country in the world. America is still an experiment. America is the world coming together to make one nation under God, right? That's what we're trying to do. So we must recognize the problems that exist, and then we have to deliberately work to correct them, even if it means that white people have to give up some of the wealth that they have taken from others to put them in a position so we can say and point out that they operate on white supremacy. White supremacy has to end, and we have to be honest about that. And we can get there through efforts like reparations, educational programs, improving schools for Black people, going into neighborhoods and making sure that their buildings and the homes they live in are healthy, thriving homes, that these young people, the Black kids in Black neighborhoods have Black teachers, you know? All these things are important, that the people who work in Congress that are Black aren't just pushing brooms. They're not the janitors, you know? They're not just that. They have high level positions as well. You know, these things matter. We know the answers. We just refuse to do them because that means I have to share my wealth with you. I like you as long as you're there. And that's a problem. Okay? We have to say that. We got to call a thing a thing. And then together we will heal as a nation. We really will. We have a wonderful opportunity to truly be the beacon for the rest of the world. So we have to take it, but it's really going to take each and every single one of us. And the media will have to play an important role. And I'm very grateful for social media because there's activism there too. It was because of social media and all the TikTokers that the talk show host was able to correct the wrong he did. All right. So it's just that complicated and it's just that simple. We just have to do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who have been following along, you have been listening to this is the Quintasia podcast, and this has been an absolutely great discussion. Obviously, we could continue this discussion, and we will. You know, we can revisit this. I don't suspect that problems are going to be resolved, and I think there'll be more shows that we can do on this. I just want to touch upon a few quick points, and it's a good way to summarize why Quintasia Studios is doing this podcast. Again, we do feel that the media has a role to play in this in the solutioning of this problem, and the media's role has been to help perpetuate the system that ails us. But what I want to impress upon everyone who comes across this podcast is if you don't take anything else away, I want you to take this away. You can't expect other people to fix the world. That's not going to happen. I'm not saying you get a messiah complex and you go try to save the world yourself, but I'm saying that we all have a role to play in this, and we have to realize that the world is not going to magically fix itself. You must take a proactive position. And how do you do that? Educate yourself. Understand what the historical issues, the wrongs, the grievances are. Become well versed in them. Be able to talk about them. Do not hide from them. We can't fix this problem until we acknowledge that there is a problem. And clearly, we're not all on the same page that we have a problem. And if this country is not truly for everyone, this experiment will not work. That is the bottom line. If we can't all fully participate, then what would be the point? Why would someone move their family to a country that they know nothing about, that they have no, connections to, other than for the hope of a better life? If that hope dissipates, then that pipeline dissipates. And I know that there are people in this country who will be very happy if that happened. But I tell you that that would be the end of America, because, you know, for those people who came here voluntarily, that was the process of how it happened. And we must acknowledge, for those who didn't come here voluntarily, their contribution to the, to the progress of America. Before America became an industrial power, it was an agricultural power. It could not have been an agricultural power were it not for slave labor. Fact, and you cannot separate those two. And because of that, there's going to have to be a reckoning in terms of reparations, of how do we make this whole, the same way as the Germans addressed what was done during the Holocaust. America at some point will have to do that. And I know that's a political hot potato for people to talk about, but I'm glad to see that there are serious discussions going on as to just how we do that. But to make sure that we don't find ourselves in this problem again, I hope that after listening to this podcast, you think about, how you talk to your neighbors, how you talk to your family, and how you talk to your children about this issue. Because what you do will affect if this problem is going to be solved or not. You are part of this. Whether you feel like you are or you aren't, you are. We're all of us. We're all in this together. And I hope we can take this as a learning moment and truly strive towards that more perfect union. So on that note, I want to thank our guest, Jeanette Lenoir, for coming back. Great discussion. And of
Thank
course,
you.
thank Randy Wang, our controller, and our CTO, Harv Lacko, for their participation. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you have, please subscribe. However you're listening to our podcast, whether it be on Facebook or YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, and now I'm happy to add to that growing list of the Quintasia Podcast Network, Pandora. We are now on Pandora as well. So however you find us, hey, subscribe to all of them, because you can listen to your car, wherever you are, just subscribe. Go ahead. Thank you for listening. As I said, this has been the Quintasia Podcast, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.